So hey anime fans. The series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Kurenai. So let's start the series. For everyone but one 19-year-old shinobi, the day was bright and sunny in Hyde Ninja Village Geikir no Sato. With his hands in his pockets and a slight slump in his posture, Naruto was strolling slowly down the street. He didn't have a specific goal, other than perhaps somewhere Sakura Haruno, his longtime crush, wasn't. The blonde Naruto Kabetsu ninja was going to cross the pinkette from her list of possible girlfriends today. He was put on a mission to catch Naruto buddy Uchiha, alive or dead, just over 2 months after being promoted for his extensive knowledge of the law-sealing techniques of his now-defunct clan and his notable aptitude with wind-style ninjin art. Sadly, it turned out that Naruto's companion had opted for the former, and following a bloody battle in which the rest of the team was rendered helpless, Naruto was compelled to murder his comrade. Sakura would have nothing to do with him once he returned with the corpse slung over his shoulder. At that point, Naruto made the error of attempting to ask her out and got the harshest tongue lashing he had ever experienced. It was only at this point that Naruto realized he was far better off without Sakura. If she was so infatuated with a shallow, deceitful hate-monger that she wouldn't even consider another male, then she didn't deserve anybody else but the object of her absurd fixation. Naruto was initially upset with Sakura, but after giving it more thought, he saw that the circumstances were actually rather depressing. In addition to trying to kill the blonde Kakashi, and the other red-haired girl who had been present during the altercation with Danzo, Naruto's companion had attempted to kill her at least once. Despite the fact that it was obvious that Naruto's friend only cared about himself, she insisted that she loved him even in death. Then, after much questioning and screening by Ibiki and Inoichi, Naruto's mind turned to Karen. She was offered the option to become a leaf kunoichi on a probationary basis until she could demonstrate her loyalty or risk spending the rest of her life behind bars for siding with Orochimaru, a friend of Naruto and consequently Akatsuki. She made the obvious decision to join the military of Hyde Ninja Village. Since then, Naruto had met the girl multiple times. While she appeared kind enough, her masochism occasionally bothered him. When the blonde bumped into someone else, his daydream was interrupted. Naruto bowed slightly and apologized, only to see that he had bumped into a woman with crimson eyes, long, black, disheveled hair, and a curiously arched eyebrow. Kurenai-sensei? Despite his frustration with the slow learning curve of his less-than-ideal skill with the illusionary arts, Kurenai frowned at his current demeanor. They had been working together somewhat infrequently, with Naruto trying to help him with his Gen spirit art for that final leap to a full ninja when he could find time in between missions. Otherwise, he was almost always smiling, even during training. "Hello, Naruto. Something wrong? You seem pretty down today," she said with a kind smile. Sighing, Naruto said, "It's Sakura-san." Kurenai nodded in comprehension. She had learned about the boy's crush soon after they began training together, and based on her observations, he had been pursuing someone for years who hardly even knew he existed. "Relationship troubles then?" He sighed. "That's putting it mildly. Last time I asked her out, she completely tore me apart. It's for the better, though. I guess we're just not meant for each other." Kurenai scowled once more. The expression in his eyes was more important than his words. Even though he knew better, the fake smile might have fooled others, but the expression in his eyes informed him that it still hurt. She briefly contemplated finding Hinata to arrange a date with her in order to show him that he wasn't quite as hopeless in love as he believed, but then she recalled that the Hyuga heiress had mentioned that sometime after her confession during Pain's invasion, Naruto had told her that he just didn't think of her in the same way. Then she came up with another scheme to make him feel better. She grinned and replied, "I'm free tonight." In an instant, Naruto's eyebrows went upward. "Did she say what I believe she said? You and Kakashi have been out on missions since your promotion, right? Plus you're getting a lot better with your Gen spirit art. Why don't we go out and celebrate? The red-eyed woman said, defending her offer after noticing the expression on his face. Naruto's expression softened a little when she explained it, but no matter what justification she offered, he couldn't shake the idea that it was a pity date. He wasn't sure what to do in light of that. Kurenai was 15 years older than him, yet he still found her attractive and liked her fairly well. Nevertheless, he didn't enjoy the thought of people feeling sorry for him. Despite himself, he responded, "Sure." "Great, see you at 6 then?" Kurenai grinned. All Naruto could say in answer was, "Yeah." 5:53 p.m. later that day. Naruto inhaled deeply to regain his composure. He hoped that his attire was not too casual, consisting of a black short-sleeved t-shirt with a swirl on the left arm and his favorite orange color, beige cargo pants, and white sneakers. However, it's possible that he was overanalyzing the situation or that she simply wanted to congratulate him on his promotion to Tokujo and that the date wasn't particularly formal or polite. Naruto steeled himself and repeatedly rapped his knuckles on the wood of Kurenai's apartment door. After almost a minute, he was about to knock again when the door opened to reveal Kurenai Yuhi. When he saw that she was wearing her usual shinobi sandals, dark blue denim capri pants, and a modestly high-cut dark red v-neck, Naruto sighed with relief. She also gave off the impression that she was wearing no makeup today, or at least that she was aiming for a natural makeup look. Naruto found it difficult to distinguish between the two. He did observe that she was fumbling with the clasp of a necklace made out of a white gold chain with a quite large teardrop-shaped amethyst. Naruto assumed it was something significant to her, perhaps a gift from Asuma just before his murder at the hands of Haiden, because it didn't exactly match her current outfit. She grinned broadly and said, "Hi, Naruto." He pointed at the necklace and said, "Hey, Kurenai-sensei. Need some help with that?" With a short sigh of relief, the red-eyed woman turned around and pulled her hair aside so Naruto could reach the annoyingly tiny mechanism. "I'd appreciate that." As Naruto's fingertips touched the back of Kurenai's neck, a shiver went down her spine. She felt his touch for the first time, but it was gone almost as quickly, much to her dismay. His words were, "All done." Kurenai turned to look at the blonde shinobi with half-fake awe. Whenever she got a chance to wear it, she normally had to struggle with the silly thing for 10 minutes to get it correctly. "I might have to call you every time I need help putting on a necklace, it always takes me forever." His friend simply smiled at Naruto as he touched the back of his head and laughed a little awkwardly at her joke. At last, he said, "So, where are we headed to?" "Tonight is your night, remember? Your choice." Naturally, Naruto's initial inclination was to head straight for Ichiraku, but because Kurenai was making the extra effort to spend the evening with him, he needed to at least choose a slightly more elegant location than a tiny ramen stall. He then recalled a location Jiraiya had mentioned to him years before. All he could hope for was that it was one of the locations that had been reconstructed in a similar location following the destruction of the hamlet. After some exploring, the two of them reached the new Shashiya about 15 minutes later. They were seated at a table in a corner away from the main traffic, which was slightly higher than it was during the day at that time, but the mid-afternoon food rush hour had since subsided significantly. Kurenai let out an inward sigh of relief at their arrival. She had been fully expecting to be sitting at Ichiraku's by now, with a wall of empty ramen bowls between them. The fact that Naruto had actually ordered some sake to go with their meal was even more unexpected. The blonde's somber attitude from earlier in the day reappeared shortly after the waiter left, causing Kurenai to scowl once again. "So what's up with you and Sakura?" she asked candidly. "You've mentioned she turned you down before, but I've never seen you so gloomy about it." Similar to how he did when she brought this up at their previous encounter, Naruto sighed once more. He made the decision to just put all his cards on the table since he knew that dismissing Kurenai or telling her it was none of her concern would just cause tension. If his training in Gen spirit art taught him anything, it was that she was a very tenacious lady when she wanted to be. Ever since I got back from that mission to get Naruto friend a few weeks ago, she's been cold to me and Kakashi-sensei. Sakura blames me for the team's death. Kurenai simply glanced at Naruto, believing he was attempting to deceive her while being fully aware of the mission report. When Naruto realized what she was saying, he took action to protect himself. Before forcing himself to calm down and lower his voice, he looked around and realized he had drawn the attention of some of the other patrons. The mission was to bring him back dead or alive, and we tried convincing him first, but just like when we fought at the Valley of the End, he wouldn't listen. That bastard was so wrapped up in his own hatred and convinced he was above us just because of that stupid Sharingan and his family name that he attacked us and killed the squad captain before we could even react. In an apparent attempt to control his emotions, Naruto bit his lower lip and said, I didn't want to kill Naruto friend, but he didn't leave me any choice. Kurenai simply gave her partner a pitying glance. She had undoubtedly been there before. It wasn't fun at all when you couldn't hit someone you didn't want to kill with a crippling blow, and it was even worse when you thought of that person as a friend. Alternatively, they were once your friend. However, that only partially explained the drama involving the pink-haired doctor. Her obsession with the angsty adolescent was well known, and anyone with a human sense could see that she and Naruto had become closer ever since that traitor abandoned Team Kakashi. She reasoned that Sakura would eventually come around and understand what she had. Naruto was one of the strongest shinobi in Hyde Ninja Village and was constantly putting the happiness of others before his own. Any girl would be fortunate to have him. If it weren't for the obvious age difference, and the fact that everyone knew Naruto was the son of Minato, the notorious Yellow Flash of Hyde Ninja Village, he would even pass for identical twins. He was also quite handsome, and over the years, he had become almost exactly like his father, save for the shorter hair and whisker marks on either cheek. Kurenai-sensei? Naruto asked, attempting to catch her eye. When the woman realized she had been staring and that she had also been mentally admiring his appearance and attitude, she blushed slightly. Sorry, Naruto. What were you saying? Naruto arched an eyebrow at the Gen spirit art mistress. Normally, she wouldn't stare at him or randomly nod off, but he chose to ignore it. When the waiter returned with their food and beverages, Naruto simply waved off her apology and used the opportunity to move away from Sakura and onto a little more positive subject. So how's my Gen spirit art coming along? I feel like I'm starting to get the hang of it a little better, but it doesn't really feel like I'll ever very good at it. He immediately shifted the topic. Kurenai paused for a moment before responding. Well, you're not really well suited to Gen spirit art to begin with. Your chakra control has gotten better since your Genin days, but you still have too much of it to control it as precisely as a Hyuga or a Medic Nin, which makes using Gen spirit art difficult. Naruto nodded in agreement. A few years ago, he would have been offended and would have yelled, taking the honest truth as a slight or insult. However, he had realized that, given his enormous chakra reserves and his inability to control them, creating a Gen spirit art was like attempting to use a paintbrush to sign his name on a postage stamp. It would be impossible for Naruto to use Gen spirit art in live battle, and he could only occasionally master basic D-rank skills when practicing with a partner. On the plus side, your partnership with the Kyuubi makes you completely immune to all Gen spirit art attacks, even high-level ones like Tsukuyomi. Kurenai went on. Naruto nodded his agreement once more. It didn't really matter that the Mangekyo Sharingan were the only ones with immunity to Tsukuyomi, and the only man still alive with a Sharingan couldn't use that technique anyhow. Besides, Kakashi wouldn't want to use it against his student in the first place, even if it was for training. However, having a buddy inside your body who could easily dispel any illusions before Naruto even realized he had been caught in one did assist. Kurenai concluded with a warm smile that Naruto couldn't help but return. But I think with a bit of hard work you should be able to get your skill in Gen spirit art to a level where you can qualify for full ninja. Eventually, the two were sharing jokes and even laughing at some awkward circumstances they occasionally revealed as they moved on to lighter subjects. After a little more than an hour, Naruto and Kurenai were walking hand in hand toward Kurenai's apartment, still having a great time together. Naruto was just happy that he accepted Kurenai's invitation to spend time with him earlier in the day, regardless of her initial intentions. The giggling abruptly stopped when they arrived at her door because Naruto was unsure of what to say, primarily because he was still unsure if this was a real date. Fortunately, Kurenai broke the silence first. She grinned and added, "Congratulations again on your promotion to Tokubetsu Ninja, Naruto." Although Naruto was relieved to have a conclusive response at last, he was also a little let down. If it had been a real date, he wouldn't have cared. In fact, he almost wished it were. However, what exactly qualifies as a date? It was just the two of them. They chatted, hung out, and enjoyed themselves, which was essentially the purpose of a date. Or was it only deemed a date if they spoke and mutually agreed that it was? "Thanks," he murmured shyly, stroking the back of his head. "You want to meet at the usual time tomorrow morning? I don't have another mission for a few days." "Sure." When Naruto heard his name, he nodded and turned to leave. When he turned around, he saw Kurenai approaching him to plant a kiss on his cheek, but she missed and their lips instead touched. Less than a second later, the red-eyed woman withdrew and stepped back a few paces to give them some space. She stammered, obviously a little taken aback by the accidental kiss. Sorry." She noticed something in the blonde's eyes that told her he liked it even if he was also rather startled by it, judging by the expression on his face. Naruto took a few hesitant steps forward, closing the gap she had created and then some, as if to confirm her assumptions. "Nerd?" she asked uneasily. Ignoring the query, Naruto paused a few inches away and leaned slowly in Kurenai's direction, mentally applauding when she didn't push him away, hit him, or retreat. Before closing the distance and giving her a real kiss, Naruto paused with their lips just a few centimeters away, gazing into her eyes as though requesting permission, then down to her pink lips. Kurenai's eyes widened as they made contact. She knew what was going to happen when Naruto began to close the distance, but she wasn't really expecting him to do it. After a moment or two, she closed her eyes and started kissing him back. She put her arms around his neck, and he put his around her waist, drawing her body close to his. Naruto was simply savoring the sensation of her soft lips on his, and he wasn't sure how long the kiss lasted. It may have been a few seconds, minutes, or even hours. As novice as Naruto was in this particular field, he realized that tongue would be inappropriate for the circumstance, so it was both passionate and innocent at the same time. Kurenai watched the saliva exchange with a smile on her face, oblivious to the purple-haired off-duty ANBU standing around the corner who had come to pick up her child from babysitting so she could go out with Naruto. The two eventually parted ways after an unspecified period of time because they both needed oxygen. Out of anxious habit, Naruto stroked his whisker lines and glanced away nervously. "That was nice," he replied clumsily, not knowing what, if anything, to say in this circumstance. When Kurenai realized what she had just done, with one of her students, no less, her cheeks turned a pale shade of pink. Unconsciously, though, she found herself nodding in agreement. To catch her attention, Naruto cleared his throat. He said, "So, usual time and place tomorrow morning?" Why yeah. I'll see you there." Naruto grinned and turned on his heel to depart, changing his form of address without realizing it. "Well, see you tomorrow then, Kurenai-chan." On his deathbed, Naruto would scream that he heard someone else remark, "Nice work, kid." But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't see anybody else in the corridor save Kurenai and himself. 8:27 a.m. the following day. Perched on the wooden post he was bound to during the bell test Kakashi had administered to Team 7 at the third training ground, Naruto sighed to himself. This time, he was dressed in the typical ninja attire, which included a flak jacket, blue leggings, and a blue long-sleeved shirt with a swirl on both sleeves. In order to honor his father, he also went above and beyond to imitate Kakashi by dressing his calves in white bandages and wearing blue fingerless gloves with a metal plate on the back of the hands. He had also gone back to wearing his maroon haori with a black flame pattern on the bottom. For his Gen Spirit Art training, he and Kurenai had been getting together there whenever possible around 8 o'clock. Fortunately, the training area was empty because Naruto was scheduled to serve as a ninja sensei for the upcoming Team 7, and the next group of academy students wouldn't be prepared to be assigned one for at least 2 more years. I guess you won't be attending. What was I thinking last night when I kissed her? Naruto scolded himself in his head. A person leaped from a tree branch at the border of the woodland surrounding the training area and began to approach him as soon as he leaped off the post. She waved greetingly and shouted from a distance, "Sorry I'm late, Naruto-kun." When she had come closer, Naruto said, "No problem, but I was starting to think you weren't going to show. I had a little trouble finding someone to watch Bai-chan for the day." Kurenai initially didn't understand why Naruto was staring at her with curiosity, but then she recalled that he had told her about Killer B, or Uncle B as Naruto called him, the only other person to survive the conflict. "Bai-chan is my daughter," she said. "Her full name is Biwako, after Sandame-sama's wife that died the night the Kyuubi attacked 19 years ago, but she hates it when people call her that, so I call her B instead." The thought of just one of the hundreds of people who perished the night of his birth made Naruto stiffen a little, but he eventually dismissed it. Even though most of the people of Hyde Ninja Village disagreed with him throughout his early years, he eventually realized that what had happened that night wasn't his fault. In addition, he had exacted his retribution. Shortly before he committed himself, he told Toby how much Naruto hated him for being the reason his parents and the others died that night. Even though Naruto had the capacity to forgive Nagato, he believed that Toby was a disgusting man who was beyond his or anyone else's capacity for forgiveness. Kurenai stretched and remarked, "Okay, let's get started then." Naruto grinned. He had only cast a D-rank Gen Spirit Art once before, and even then it took him multiple tries and the illusion didn't work as intended. Nevertheless, he was sure he could do it correctly this time, and on the first try no less. Using a shadow clone as a partner, he had been training covertly at night and in the afternoon. Although clones are immune to illusions, Naruto found that they can still cast them, and if he asked the Kyuubi not to interfere with his chakra flow unless he was unable to break the Gen Spirit Art himself, it proved to be a very successful training method. He learned firsthand what the technique actually accomplished, and after the clone dispelled itself, he learned how to use it as well. Although the clone was never needed, Naruto created the clone seal and shadow clone poofed into existence behind Kurenai. They both agreed that it would be wise to have someone nearby who could assist her in breaking out a Gen Spirit Art in the unlikely event that Naruto was unable to do it herself. Kurenai popped her knuckles and remarked, "Let's see what you've learned so far, Naruto." Before intonating the technique's name, Naruto nodded and made the proper hand seals. Me. Demonic Illusion, Death Mirage Spirit Art. Kurenai grinned as she saw the whirl of leaves wrap her. It may be a straightforward technique, but it was impressive that it appeared to be working right away. However, the illusion it created was just terrifying, so her happiness at being ensnared in the technique ended there. The woman with the raven hair turned to her right and saw a man with silver hair that was slicked back, wearing an Akatsuki cloak. He was brandishing a triple-bladed scythe that was painted red and had a steel cable attached to the end that ran beneath the man's cloak. She recognized the man right away as Haiden, the man who killed her lover and her daughter's father. She shakily created the tiger seal and ordered the technique to dissolve, not wanting to see where this illusion would take her. Release. To her dismay, the illusion persisted rather than dissipating as Haydn appeared to remove a small child, who appeared to be quite familiar, from his coat. Then he turned to face Kurenai, licking his lips sadistically while grinning. She ordered them to release. Nothing changed, though, as Haydn simply chuckled silently, tossed the biwako into the air, and positioned himself to swing his scythe upward, which would most likely split the child in two. At the same moment as Haydn swung his weapon, Biwako reached the peak of her airtime and began to descend back toward the ground. Release! She yelled frantically. Kurenai felt a hand on her shoulder as the sharp object was ready to touch human flesh. Haydn and Biwako vanished, and a clone of Naruto appeared by her side as the original one started to run in her direction. Kurenai fell to all fours, hyperventilating as her legs gave out. As his clone disappeared in a cloud of smoke, Naruto yelled, "Kurenai-chan!" and skidded to a halt right in front of her. Naruto knelt down next to the anxious woman and put a hand on her shoulder, asking, "Kurenai, are you okay?" As she moved herself into a sitting position and pushed her left side onto Naruto's chest, she appeared to relax a little under his touch. In response, he put his arms over her shoulders in an embrace and rested his chin on top of her head. She appeared to have significantly calmed down after a few minutes, as her respiration returned to normal. In a quiet voice, Naruto repeated, "Are you okay, Kurenai-chan?" The woman simply gave a feeble nod. He went on, "I'm really sorry about that." "Don't be," Kurenai replied with conviction. "I'm proud of you for finally casting your first-gen spirit art successfully." But it didn't mean he liked it. Naruto didn't fight since he knew it wouldn't help him and because he had no control over what the victim would see if they were trapped in that specific spirit art. Kurenai's shoulders shook a little, and the blonde held her tighter as Kurenai gripped Naruto's haori. To think that a shinobi who was once believed to be totally incompetent in every way of life used a basic D-rank technique to bring the formidable Gen spirit art mistress of Hyde Ninja Village Geikir to her knees. Naturally, she was aware of Naruto's strength and ability as a shinobi, and he was also a charming young man, she reflected, blushing slightly. Still, she was on the verge of laughing out at the thought. The two parted ways in humiliation as a new voice chirped from a distance. My, you two seem to be getting along well." In shock, Naruto exclaimed, "As Shizunekin!" as he realized the Godame's helper had ambushed them. In joking, she said, "So do you two normally cuddle during training?" Shizun laughed at them as the two in question both flushed. Fortunately, a fourth individual, who turned out to be Kurenai's daughter, Biwako, appears from behind the woman to interrupt her mocking before the younger one could deliver another jab. Kurenai thought the youngster was running for an embrace when Bi rushed up to them, but she was totally ignored in favor of her blonde friend. As the little brunette girl stood in front of him, merely examining his features, Naruto cast a curious glance down at her. Her face brightened after a few minutes of this, as if she had just realized something. She declared fairly loudly, "You're the man Auntie Yugao said was kissing mommy last night." Both Naruto and Kurenai became unnaturally red and turned to face Shizun as they heard her eep in surprise. They covered her mouth with one hand and held Tompkins with the other, who also appeared somewhat taken aback. Shizun just gave him a wide-eyed expression. Kurenai answered in a composed tone and coughed lightly into her hand, her cheeks remaining stubbornly pink, revealing her actual feelings. "What are you doing here, Shizun-san?" Shizun gave an honest response, saying, "Bai-chan wanted to watch you and Naruto train." The toddler just gave a forceful nod. Kurenai and Naruto tensed up, recalling the recent tiny mistake. While Kurenai was recalling the illusion, Naruto was concerned that the young child might have witnessed her mother's previous state. Shortly after, the illusion was disregarded. Kurenai's distant glance caught the medic Nin's attention at first, and then he turned to face the blonde, whose eyes seemed to ask the question he was thinking. Naruto sighed with relief as Shizen merely shook her head no. So, Shizen said with a light-hearted grin, Naruto and Kurenai, huh? Have you two decided on a wedding date yet? In self-defense, Naruto stammered, obviously quite agitated. Wait a minute, it's not like that. Databeo. His famous catchphrase unintentionally came out, much like the late Kushina. With all her strength, Shizen suppressed a fit of laughter that was about to burst out of her throat and instead scowled playfully, obviously enjoying the taunting. She scolded. So you're just using the poor girl as a make-out buddy? It's not nice to play with a woman's heart, Naruto-kun. Naruto became pale. If the fifth head master learned of his alleged immoral behavior, he would undoubtedly receive the worst beating of his life. When Shizen saw the sheer dread in Naruto's eyes, she couldn't contain her amusement any longer, and burst out laughing, gripping her sides. Shizen nearly choked on laughing for a few minutes, but she was able to contain herself by wiping the tears from her eyes and occasionally hooing and hawing in between giggles. Through several more giggles, she stammered, Sorry, Naruto. I couldn't resist. Naruto sighed with satisfaction, grateful that the fifth head master would not treat him like a drum, as his late master Jiraiya had done. However, the fact that he had been duped made him feel a little ashamed. She said gravely, So, care to explain? This time, B was contentedly sitting in Kurenai's arms, and all three grown-ups were standing. Naruto furrowed his brows a little. He said clumsily, rubbing a whisker mark out of anxious habit, It was, sir, an accident. Shizen just arched one eyebrow. Kurenai caught the other woman's attention by clearing her throat. Kurenai explained that they were out celebrating his promotion to Takujo, but she didn't mention that it was also a fake date. She went to kiss him on the cheek but missed it, and Naruto started the real kiss, much to his dismay. What he means is, either of us planned for it to happen. Shizen blinked at Naruto many times as soon as she heard the final line, causing his cheeks to become a deep scarlet. With a faux pout, she remarked, That doesn't sound like an accident. Naruto appeared to be about to speak, but the medic Nin interrupted him. With a nice pat on the back, Shizen remarked, I didn't think you had it in you. Nice work, kid. What did you just say? Naruto said, squinting at the woman. Nice work, kid, she said again. For a little while, the blonde's face furrowed in contemplation before he said, You already knew about it, didn't you? No, I just found out when a certain little munchkin said she caught you red-handed. Why? Shizen replied, shaking her head. Naruto's face twisted again. Someone said the exact same thing to me last night, right after he was saying. Kurenai felt like something clicked at that precise moment. The purple-haired Anbu may have something to say about it. She handed B to a bewildered Naruto and said simply, I just remembered something I have to do. Exasperated, the blonde sighed. I guess training is over. Later that day, at 7:42 p.m. Standing outside a well-known door, Naruto cracked his knuckles as softly as he could while yet making enough noise to be heard. Biwako Yuhi, who had been dozing off the whole way back to the apartment, awakened at the unwanted sound and buried her face in Naruto's shoulder. A woman with chocolate eyes, long purple hair, and reddish-purple lipstick answered the door almost instantly. She smirked and slid out the door when she saw who it was and who was contentedly dozing off on his shoulder. Before bidding farewell and leaving, she shouted back inside and winked at an even more humiliated Naruto, saying, Kurenai, your hobby is back with Bai-chan. The red-eyed woman blinked a few times when she turned the corner and spotted a tall, blond man standing outside the door with a young child while still dressed in ninja gear. Naruto-kun? What are you doing here? Wasn't Shizen-san babysitting today? To avoid disturbing the girl on his shoulder, he muttered. You handed her to me when you stormed off earlier. Flatly, she said. Oh, sorry. Naruto only laughed at her fleeting period of insanity. Kurenai gestured for him to enter and made a move to retrieve her daughter, but the youngster objected by clinging to Naruto's Haori. Kurenai let out a defeated sigh, while Naruto grinned. Kurenai escorted Biwako to her room, where Naruto gently removed the child from his person and tucked her up. He kissed her cheek goodnight, to which she replied with a sweet smile and a cute snore. Kurenai was leaning against the door frame wearing her nightwear, which included a pair of navy blue men's boxer shorts and a big, plain white wife beater that he imagined had once belonged to Asuma. Naruto couldn't help but be amazed at how the top barely revealed her huge bust sides and a tiny bit of cleavage. After they had both left the room and closed the door, the woman with the raven hair said, You're a natural, Naruto-kun. You'll make a great father someday. Naruto just turned his head aside, his cheeks slightly flushed. As they returned to the living room, she inquired, What have you two been doing all day? Recalling the day's activities, Naruto was reflective as he said, We had lunch at Ichiraku's, we went to the park, we even talked for a little. Given how nicely the two appeared to get along, Kurenai couldn't help but smile warmly. She added with sincerity, Sounds like you two really hit it off. Naruto gave his head a sheepish rub and said, Yeah, and after you left she told me how much she wanted to be a ninja, like you and Shizen-nekin and myself, so I showed her a few Tai spirit art moves. Rather forcefully, the red-eyed woman placed the tea tray she had brought from the kitchen on the sofa table. You did what? She said astonishedly. It was nothing fancy, just some of the basic forms they teach to first-year academy students, Naruto argued. With a frown, Kurenai said, You had no right to do that, she'll never be a kunoichi. Naruto poured himself some tea and remarked, But Kurenai-chan, she's a natural, I only had to show her the moves once or twice and she got them almost perfectly. Kurenai went on to chastise her blonde companion, saying, Don't question me, Naruto. You never had parents to do what was best for you, you always just did what you felt like as a child. Biwako is not going to become a shinobi. As Naruto placed the teacup back on the tray, his face instantly hardened. When Kurenai realized her error, she winced, redirected the tongue lashing to herself, and chastised herself in her head for saying something so hurtful to Naruto, especially because she was well aware of his parents. Thank you for the tea, Kurenai-sensei. I'm not feeling well, I should go home and get some rest, he replied with a frown. Naruto started to leave his spot on the sofa, but as he did, a hand sprang out to seize his own. Kurenai remarked, Naruto, wait, I'm sorry. I was out of line. With a cold tone, the headmaster wannabe answered, Yeah, you were. Kurenai expertly sandwiched Naruto's hand with the other and gave him a little squeeze. I really am sorry. It's just that I'm scared. Bai-chan is all I have left after Asuma was killed by that Akatsuki bastard. If she got killed on a mission, I don't know what I'd do, Kurenai said sadly. When Naruto seized Kurenai's hand and held it in his own, playing with her fingers lovingly, Kurenai's eyes misted up in fear that she had driven him away with one foolish comment. Naruto then firmly released his hand. Naruto responded, It's okay, Kurenai-chan. His voice was still a little dejected, so his tone was anything but comforting. The two simply sat hand in hand in a semi-comfortable silence for the next few minutes. Naruto made the decision to bring up a topic he had been thinking about all day. Kurenai-chan? With considerable uneasiness, Naruto stammered, What do you think of me? After giving it some thought, Kurenai concluded that he could only mean one thing. she questioned. Is this about last night? Nuda merely gave a nod of approval. Kurenai said, Let me ask you a question first. After a moment of hesitation, Nuda finally consented. What do you think of me? She inquired pointedly. When his inquiry was turned back on him, Nuda scowled, but he still responded. I really like you, Kurenai-chan. The shy Nuda replied. Back in the academy, when the teams were first assigned, I remember thinking you were really pretty. I even asked Kakashi-sensei if I could trade places with Kiba, Shino, or Hinata. I had the biggest crush on you up until I left to go on the training trip with Ero-sennin. Kurenai laughed at his modest confession of his crush for Jiraiya and his nickname for her. She asked. Had? Why'd you stop? Sighing. You're 15 years older than I am, and I was just a kid. I shrugged off as some shallow puppy love, fawning over you because of the way you looked. I didn't even know anything about you except your name. We barely said 2 words to each other after the genin teams were assigned. Kurenai blushed a little at the second, inadvertent praise on her appearance, but she nodded in understanding. With sincere interest, she inquired, The age gap doesn't bother you now? Shaking his head, Nuda said, Age is just a number. Kurenai grinned at this new Nuda. He had certainly changed during the previous 3 years from his brazen, loud-mouthed personality, but he rarely spoke candidly, effortlessly, or maturely like this. More than simply his sense of style, Naruto had inherited Kakashi's demeanor. Typically, he was laid back and indolent when he was just lounging around doing nothing specific, as the two of them were doing just now. However, the blonde was every bit the stubborn and opinionated person whom everyone grew to love when the time was right. Kurenai gently squeezed Naruto's hand to get his attention. They simply stared into each other's eyes for a few moments before Kurenai cupped Naruto's face with her free hand, caressed his cheekbone with her thumb, and then moved down a little to run the digit the length of one of his seemingly extremely sensitive whisker lines. When Naruto felt a sudden weight on his eyelids, he closed them because a tiny smile would not go away, no matter how much he fought it in his head. Kurenai couldn't contain her laughter at the sight. When the ministrations on his cheek stopped, Naruto scowled, but when he opened his eyes, he saw Kurenai staring at him and biting her bottom lip. The raven-haired woman began gradually reducing the distance before Naruto could respond, and a few seconds later their lips locked in another chaste kiss. Kurenai gripped both of his cheeks as the blonde Takujo gently raised him and placed the woman on his lap with her legs off to his right. He then put his arms around her waist. After a few seconds, the two parted ways, and Kurenai wrapped her arms around Naruto as well. She then leaned her head into the bend of his neck and savored the warmth of her new lover. Naruto? She whispered. To demonstrate that he was listening, the blonde briefly halted the motion of his hand, which had been softly massaging Kurenai's back, and then resumed his activities. Was that your first kiss? Yeah. In any case, with a woman? In order to avoid having to explain the academy incident with a certain Uchiha, Naruto decided not to express that final thinking. Kurenai simply grinned happily and began to nod off as her back began to gently massage her in a comfortable position. A few days later, at 9:29 a.m., Naruto was having one of his typical disagreements with the fifth headmaster while he stood frowning in the headmaster's office. The blonde headmaster rubbed her temples and murmured, I'm not giving you an S-rank mission, Naruto. He whimpered, Why not? I can handle it no problem. As fifth headmaster's fury increased, a vein on her forehead became more noticeable. You're only a Tokubetsu ninja. You should be grateful I even allow you to go on A-rank missions. Under his breath, Naruto grumbled something about stingy old hags. Unfortunately for Naruto, fifth headmaster had greater hearing than he would have imagined. She slammed both hands down on her desk and abruptly stood up, asking, What did you say, brat? Naruto simply looked away, his nose proudly jutting up in the air, and made a mocking noise before crossing his arms over his chest. Fifth Headmaster's right hand tightened into a fist so hard that her fingernails bit into her palm and her knuckles became white, causing the vein in her forehead to bulge once again. Tauntaun and Shizen both let out a collective sigh during the conversation. Although it could seem to the uninitiated that they were fighting, their fights were only a way of expressing their love for one another. Though either of them would ever acknowledge it because of their obstinate pride, the two did genuinely care for one another. At times, Shizen wished they would just stop talking and give each other hugs, just as any other adoptive grandmother/foster grandson duo would. A tiny bundle of hyperactivity rushed into the room and clung to Naruto's left leg just as the fifth headmaster was ready to rip into him. When a little, familiar voice called out to him, the younger of the two blondes in the room suddenly forgot his anger and smiled. Token! Token! Naruto reached down to pick up Bee, lifted her into the air, and then placed her on his shoulders to sit. When Bee almost lost her equilibrium in a moment of excitement, Naruto grimaced, and she chose to utilize a tuft of blonde as a hand grip. Shizen and the fifth headmaster stared at them incredulously after blinking multiple times to confirm they weren't having visual or hearing hallucinations. Although Shizen wasn't as shocked as the fifth headmaster to witness Bee and Naruto playing together, she was nevertheless taken aback when Biwako Yuhi called the teenager Daddy. Kurenai started to reprimand her daughter. Biwako, what have I told you about Dash? But stopped when she noticed Naruto, whom she hadn't seen in a few days, with the youngster perched on his shoulders. When Naruto claimed he wasn't feeling well after having tea, it seems he wasn't just making up an excuse because he became ill later that evening and stayed in bed till the next morning. Bee chirped. Kakin! Look, I found Daddy! Naruto reached up and tickled her sides, causing her to burst out laughing. As though Naruto were actually the girl's biological father, Kurenai couldn't help but sigh and grin with pleasure at how wonderfully her daughter and lover got along. Both Naruto and Kurenai were initially taken aback when Bee called the former Dad, but Naruto didn't appear to mind. Since Bee had never met Asuma prior to his passing, Naruto was actually the only male figure in her life who resembled a father. Although there was a shadow ninja, he was more of an uncle or guardian than a father figure. Hello, Naruto-kun. Feeling better? Naruto grinned and gave an affirmative nod. After the fifth headmaster cleared her throat to get everyone's attention, Naruto and Kurenai blushed a little as they recognized their predicament. Fifth headmaster gave them a look that suggested she was waiting for an explanation for what she had just seen. Me and Kurenai-chan are. Oh, we're. Naruto said, swallowing hard and anxiously rubbing a whisker mark once again. Kurenai stepped to her lover's side, slipped her hand into his, and entwined their fingers before interjecting. Naruto-kun and I are dating. How troublesome. Nara, a shadow ninja, was lounging idly against the door frame with a stack of papers under one arm when Naruto and Kurenai turned around. Naruto said, Hey, shadow ninja. He punctuated his greeting with a tense laugh. After dismissively waving a hand, the shadow ninja said, Relax, Naruto. Asuma-sensei only made me promise to look after Bai-chan. The indolent shinobi gave Naruto a single glance before hardening his face. With a menacing stare, he said, Just don't do anything to hurt either one of them, Naruto. Leaving the or else unsaid despite its obvious presence. Naruto gave a solemn nod, but Shadow Ninja appeared to lose interest almost instantly after warning him. He then walked over to place the pile of documents on Fifth Headmaster's desk and departed the room, saying goodbye with a languid gesture over his shoulder. Kurenai forgot why she had come in the first place when she and Naruto bid each other goodnight and departed. A few minutes later, the couple was strolling down the street with Bee between them. She was holding Kurenai's right hand in her left hand and Naruto's left in her right. They were laughing, joking, and generally enjoying each other's company, utterly oblivious to the looks and whispers that were being directed at the hero of the hidden leaf and his girlfriend everywhere they looked. Unfortunately, a certain pink-haired kunoichi who stalked up to the couple swiftly ruined the atmosphere. Sakura virtually spit his name as if it had left a bad taste in her mouth, saying, "I see you found someone else to throw yourself at, Naruto." With a frown, Naruto said, "At least I know how to move on, Sakura. You're still too obsessed with the traitor for your own good." Sakura Haruno destroyed his day. "I bet she just feels sorry for you. Nobody would actually want to be with the Kyuubi," she grumbled. At addition to his own blood beginning to boil, Naruto could feel Nine Fox growl at the back of his mind. Sakura would lose his temper in the middle of Hyde Ninja Village if he didn't stop talking quickly, and that wouldn't be nice. Naruto was going to respond when he was unexpectedly defended by someone. With a cute frown of her own, Bee said sharply, "You leave my token alone, you big meanie!" "Token?" Sakura laughed. "Why would you defend someone like Naruto? He's nothing compared to SAS-. As Kurenai slapped Sakura across the face, the painful crack of flesh hitting flesh interrupted Sakura's remark in the middle of its phrase. Kurenai's tight hand remained in midair for a few more seconds before she gently drew it back down to her side, and Sakura's head was cocked to the side with a fast reddening cheek. Naruto stared wide-eyed and slack-jawed at the sight. "That's enough, Haruno. Uchiha isn't now, never was, and never will be half the man Naruto is. He's the kindest, gentlest, most loving and most loyal man I know. Any girl in Hyde Ninja Village would be lucky to have him. That could have been you if you'd have pulled your head out of the clouds and stopped obsessing over Naruto friend for long enough to take notice of other people. Naruto friend Uchiha is nothing but a lowly traitor who would willingly turn on his comrades if it's what best suited him. You should be ashamed to even call yourself a leaf kunoichi for even defending him, let alone insulting and belittling your comrade, your own teammate that's had your back through everything even at the cost of his own happiness," she scolded, taking in a deep breath after her ranting and punctuating it with a. Naruto felt a lump in his throat as he grinned at the dark-haired woman in front of him. No one had ever defended him in such a way before, most definitely not against the powerful Uchiha. Sakura simply scoffed at Kurenai and Naruto before brushing past the raven-haired woman with her nose in the air, making sure to give her a slight shoulder bump. Naruto murmured something incomprehensible under his breath and frowned at her departing back. Naruto started to attack Sakura for her attitude, but he was stopped when he felt a warm hand gently grasp his own. "We've been working on your Gen spirit art nonstop for weeks, and we could both use a little workout on our Tai spirit art. I'm sure it would help you release some steam. Don't let her get to you, Naruto," Kurenai said, obviously unconcerned by the pinkhead's actions. Naruto merely gave a worried glance in response. Kurenai, who seemed to understand the blonde's thoughts, laughed and added, "Don't be so full of yourself. I can handle anything you can throw at me." Naruto's gaze shifted from Kurenai to Bee and back again. "What about Dash?" Kurenai smiled and interrupted, saying, "She'll be fine, maybe Bai-chan can even learn a thing or two from watching us." Curious at the unexpected shift in perspective, Naruto inquired, "Does that mean you changed your mind about letting her become a shinobi?" Nodded. "Yeah. I thought a lot about it while you were sick, Naruto. With Sarutobi blood and you as a sensei, I'm sure she'll be one of the best kunoichi Hyde Ninja Village has ever seen." With a bewildered expression on his face, Naruto said, "But I'm supposed to be the sensei for the new Team 7 that will be graduating from the academy in a few years." Kurenai remarked, "I'm sure you could get Lady Fifth Headmaster to pull a few strings." Winking. After giving Biwako a big smile, Naruto squatted down to meet his face. "Hey, you know where Training Ground 3 is, right?" The young girl gave an enthusiastic nod. "Race ya! he said as he leaped back to his feet and glanced at Kurenai, who saw the amusing sparkle in his blue eyes. With Naruto and Kurenai keeping their distance so he could keep up, the three of them started walking down the street toward the training site. Every now and again, one of them would pull ahead a little to increase the stakes. After dueling with Naruto for several hours, Kurenai was leaned over, her legs slightly bowed, her hands resting on her knees, and she was panting profusely. The blonde wasn't even out of breath, much to her dismay. Kurenai sighed in between breaths. "That all you got?" Naruto gave a friendly laugh. He grinned arrogantly and continued, "I'm just getting warmed up." When the dark-haired ninja flicked her wrist, sending 2 shuriken flying in the direction of her blonde boyfriend, her scowl instantly turned into a smirk. The surprise attack caused Naruto's eyes to widen only a little, but he immediately considered his choices. A tiny, unexpected gust of wind caused one shuriken to veer slightly off course, missing by a few inches. He could have avoided the other, but he saw Kurenai's attitude change, which would have left him vulnerable to physical assault. To knock the shuriken out of the air, Naruto grabbed a kunai from his leg holster and hurled it into the air. At that moment, a minor wind gust blew across the field once more, slightly changing the bullet's trajectory. Even while the kunai only slightly damaged the shuriken, throwing them both a few centimeters apart, the shuriken would probably still inflict a huge gash on his right arm unless he sidestepped. At the moment, however, Naruto didn't really care where the shuriken was going because the kunai was directly aiming for Biwako Yuhi's back. Kurenai's eyes widened impossibly as she followed the trajectory of Naruto's kunai, wondering why he seemed so distracted when a pretty sharp weapon was heading directly at him. Kurenai started to move, but she froze when a yellow blur effortlessly passed her at unbelievable speeds. Because the acorn she had been playing with suddenly produced tiny tendrils that took root in the dirt and grew into a tiny oak sapling less than a foot tall in a matter of seconds, Bee sat perplexed as she felt a new warmth on her back. Naruto's right palm grasped the kunai's hilt tightly, inches from Bee's spine, and he released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. At that time the young girl turned around and her eyes nearly burst out of her head as she beheld Naruto crouching there, wrapped in a yellow cloak made of pure chakra that flickered off his body, evocative of the modest, tranquil flame of a candle. After taking a few breaths, Naruto released tailed beast mode. He was grateful that Nine Fox had allowed him to borrow some power because he couldn't have moved quickly enough to grab the weapon on his own before damage was done. Kurenai almost had a panic attack as she ran up behind Naruto. "Bai-chan! Are you okay?" she exclaimed in a panic, quickly picking up her daughter from the floor and putting her in her arms. Bee only gave Naruto a dismissive nod as she looked at him. As the last yellow chakra vanished into thin air, she babbled. "That was so cool, Token! How did you do that? Do it again!" Naruto smiled slightly and shook his head. He flashed his signature smile and said, "I'll tell you how when you're older. For now, why don't we get some lunch? My treat." "I'm not Dash!" Bee's own stomach, grumbling a little in need of food, swiftly put an end to any objection she was about to make. Kurenai and Naruto laughed as they made their way to Ichiraku's for lunch before spending the remainder of the afternoon doing something a little more entertaining for Bee. Kurenai was sitting comfortably on Naruto's lap, leaning back into his chest with ease, while Naruto had his back against the trunk, sitting Indian style, beneath a tree at the edge of the woodland that surrounded Training Ground 3. After a few hours of sitting under the stars on a clear night with his sweetheart, Naruto's legs began to hurt a little and his behind had long lost all feeling, but he didn't really care. They'd come out just after supper when Yugao had arrived up to monitor Bee, who barely made it through the meal before weariness caught up with her, and she fell asleep leaned over the table after clearing her plate. Since Naruto had been the one to answer the door, the purple-haired Anbu also gave him his typical sly smile as she passed him. Kurenai was slightly taken aback as Nuda's arms, almost anxiously, encircled her waist from behind. In response, she moved her own hands to grasp Nuda's, entwining their fingers, and snuggled back into his chest a little further. As far as she was concerned, this had been a beautiful day. As Bea and her blonde surrogate father appeared to grow closer, she spent the entire day with her daughter and Naruto, and the three of them had a great time. To top it all off, she had just watched the sunset in blissful silence, and now she was watching the stars twinkle in the arms of a man she never would have imagined falling in love with. At that notion, Kurenai's breath hitched and her heart rate sped up several paces. It was evident that she had fallen in love with Naruto. A knucklehead, noisy, and energetic. One of the 10 best shinobi the village hidden in the leaves has ever produced, but the dead last of the academy. The nine-tailed demon fox, also known as the Nine Fox. Son of 4th Head Master Minato. The 6th Head Master in the future. Naruto's breath tickled the back of her neck as he said, "Kurenai-chan? Are you okay?" Kurenai gave a little start, clearly triggered by Naruto's voice interrupting her thoughts of him, no less. She grinned and looked up at the sky as a comet flew by, leaving a dazzling, shimmering trail in its wake. "I'm perfect, Naruto." They sat in comfortable silence for some minutes, interrupted only by Kurenai, who seemed to move her mouth before she had a chance to consider it. She said in a calm yet quiet voice, "Hey, Naruto-kun?" Naruto said back, "Yeah? I love you." Her heart rate increased as soon as she finished speaking, and she couldn't help but feel a little uneasy when Naruto stiffened up and remained silent for what felt like hours until he relaxed and broke the ice. He rested his chin on Kurenai's right shoulder and said, "I love you too, Kurenai." His breath tickled her skin once more as he punctuated his assertion by slightly tightening his grip on her waist. Kurenai tried to look Naruto in the eyes by turning her head slightly to the side, but she was unable to do so and sighed in frustration. With a small laugh, Naruto released his grip on the red-eyed woman's waist, letting her turn to face the blonde. Kurenai shifted sideways on Naruto's lap and attempted to meet his gaze again, but Naruto's lips suddenly took hold of hers. Kurenai responded to Naruto's advances by putting her arms around his neck and grinning into his mouth. Naruto put his left hand on her hip and his right on Kurenai's back, allowing her to fall back into his support. Kurenai's lips smashed back into Naruto's, daring him to lick his upper lip lightly, after they had separated for a moment to catch their breath. Naruto responded by putting his own tongue in her mouth and they laid back on the soft grass, Kurenai on top of him and Naruto on his back. Due of his inexperience, Naruto's kiss was awkward, but Kurenai would be happy to teach him.